Welcome to Creator Sunday! I'm your host, Drunk3po. And do me a favor, when you see this creator and what video they're creating, leave some constructive criticism in the comments section below. You can find this creator's Twitter and YouTube channel in the pinned comment. I'll make sure I won't forget it this time. Yeah. So what do y'all think? Y'all ready? Let's go.
Greetings, my friends. Ambassador Kosh with you, coming at you with a brand new video. And today we're going to be doing something very special. For those of you who might be aware, over the last few months or so, this story has been leaking out from an interview that Rian Johnson did during the press junket and press tour during Last Jedi. And during this interview, I believe it was on CNN or one of the other news channels, Mr. Johnson made this claim that he wasn't all that very impressed with Empire Strikes Back when it was released. And he compared Empire Strikes Back in return his entry into the Star Wars sequel trilogy, The Last Jedi. And he said that if Empire had been released in the Common Era, it probably would have been just as unpopular or as disliked as his entry was. And I've got a few things to say about this, and we're going to come at this from kind of a different angle. Because one of the things I cover on this channel is I do 80s pop culture and 90s pop culture, amongst other things. And I grew up in the 1980s. Now, I was relatively young when Empire Strikes Back came out. I didn't get a chance to go see it in theaters, but I did get to see it during the special edition re-release and all. And I had seen it on TV, and I have it on VHS and DVD and Blu-ray and all like that. And I hate to break Mr. Johnson's bubble, but I don't entirely agree with his opinion that Empire Strikes Back wasn't that well liked or well received or anything, and that it would be very unpopular nowadays. And the angle I'm going to come at this is the impact that Empire Strikes Back had on the pop culture landscape of the 1980s. Because Empire came out exactly in May of 1980. And it caught on like wildfire, much like its predecessor, Star Wars. It wasn't known as A New Hope or Episode 4 at the time. It was just known as Star Wars, period. And people were chomping at the bit to see this movie when it came out. They even did a special figure release and everything in anticipation of Empire Strikes Back. And I think most everybody knows who some of that merchandise was, in particular one Mr. Boba Fett. And here's the thing. You had an absolute explosion of sci-fi movies that came out in the aftermath of Empire Strikes Back. And some of them had a very dark tone, some of them were very upbeat. But here's the thing: every movie studio was trying to get their little bit of the sci-fi pie during the 1980s, because you had, just for example, you had Paramount release the what is now known as the unintentional trilogy of Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan, Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, and Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. And you could make the argument that those people that worked on Wrath of Khan were very much influenced, not so much inspired, but very much influenced by the dark tone and tenor of Empire Strikes Back, because I know most people probably have seen Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan. And if you look at that movie, there's no beat for beat comparison between the two films, but Wrath of Khan had a very dark tone. You had the death of Spock, obviously, to save the crew and the ship of the Enterprise. And I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, but strike one. The other thing is, if you look at the merchandising that surrounded Empire Strikes Back, you had the continuation of the toy line by Kenner Toys. And people were they were chomping at the bit for these toys. They wanted the Falcon, they wanted all the figures, they wanted Boba Fett's ship and all this other stuff. And the value of these vintage toys has done nothing but gone up in subsequent years. I've even got, for those of you who can see, I've got an AT-AT that I've slowly over time rebuilt and polished up. So just based on the merchandising and the popularity of that merchandise, I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, I'm going to have to say strike two. And if you look at the influence that the director Irvin Kershner had on so many other directors that came after him, that they wanted to not so much emulate the tone of Empire Strikes Back, but they were very much inspired by what Mr. Kershner did in that story, how he directed it, how he framed it. Now, the thing you should know about Irvin Kershner is science fiction wasn't his niche. He did very small, character-driven movies. And that's one of the reasons why George Lucas brought him in to direct Empire. Not to mention the wait on Lucas to start up Lucasfilm and get all the funding and direct the first Star Wars film was such a weight on him that he wanted to bring somebody in that had the directing chops to do the second installment of the original trilogy and do it right. And Irvin Kershner very much did that. And Irvin Kershner, his claim to fame, I imagine he's done other movies that were very well known at the time, but one of his claims to fame is the fact that he was the director that did one of the most popular, most well-liked, most well-received Star Wars movies ever created. Not to mention just one of the most popular movies of all time. So much so that several months, or at least a year or so after the initial release of Empire Strikes Back, they did a limited re-release. Now, when I say limited, I mean limited in the span of time that it was out in theaters again. That people flocked to this re-release. There was such a high demand to see Empire in theaters again that Lucasfilm and 20th Century Fox actually re-released Empire Strikes Back into theaters. Now, that's not so much something that's done nowadays because you've got so many movies coming out week after week, month after month. But if you consider the fact that Empire was in such high demand that people wanted to go back and watch it again in theaters, I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, strike three. And in baseball, you're out. And one final point I'll make on anything. If you consider that the lasting impact that Empire Strikes Back has had on the pop culture landscape. Pop culture landscape. This movie is one of the most quotable, most well-known movies in cinema ever made. You've got the revelation of Vader revealing his true identity to Luke. You've got one of the greatest movie insults ever put on film. You stuck up, half-witted, scruffy looking nerf herder. You've got one of the best orchestral pieces of music ever put in a movie in terms of the Imperial March. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm not sorry, but excuse me for saying so, Mr. Johnson. You're full of it. Empire Strikes Back, it may have gotten some negative reviews from movie critics, and there might have been a small portion of the general audience or general public that didn't care for it because they just simply did not care for it. But your position that Empire was divisive, that it was unpopular, and it would be unpopular today simply holds no water. So, all that being said, if you have a love and a passion for the pop culture of the 1980s and 90s, I encourage you to come to my channel. I am on YouTube, obviously. My channel's name is actually Ambassador Kosh. And if you want to know more about that, just come on over to my channel. I am also on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Rogue5778. And these 2 decades are a passion of mine. This is when I grew up. This is something I know quite a bit about, or I will do the research to bring you the very best of the 1980s and the 1990s. So until next time, my friends, this is Ambassador Kosh signing off.